sometimes you get hit with patterns. I've noticed that recently. Things keep popping up, certain things that maybe you hadn't heard or noticed, and then you just get hit over over and over in a little small period of time with it. One of the things that I have noticed recently is the idea of, and this isn't new so much as it just has in the past 2 to 3 days, I've seen a number of different times, which is the idea of questioning whether Christians should feel bad or should have voted for or support Trump. First of all, I feel compelled to do the video because of that reason, and while at the same time I feel like here I am doing another video that somehow involves Trump. And when I wanted, I had this idea to set out and do certain videos, and to be honest, to do more videos than I have done, but of those videos, I did want to be political, but I mainly wanted to focus on how politics from my perspective, which is mainly a Christian perspective. So I guess this fits, but I hate that it tends to involve Trump so much. So in regards to why should Christians have talk about or support Trump? Can Christians support Trump? How can we support such a a negative person, I guess? And that's what I want to kind of wanted to touch on here. So it's interesting because I almost wonder why we're even asked this question. It's almost juvenile thinking, really. When it comes to voting for the president, you can vote for a third-party candidate, which won't win. So you have two choices unless you want to write in a candidate. You have the Democrats and you have the Republicans, right? So, and to not vote is to vote. And Hillary is a vile person. So the idea that if a Christian says to me, how could I support Trump? Well, you better not have supported Hillary, because you've disqualified yourself from asking me that question. I cannot tolerate that thinking, that incoherent thinking, that somehow you can question Trump but not Hillary. Hillary is disgusting, and I'm not being hyperbolic. She's a foul individual. As a Christian who believes in a coming judgment, she will be judged harshly. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It goes beyond politics at this point. So who should we have voted for? If you have to vote between two choices, is it best to say, well, I'm going to not vote because that's my conscience. I'm going to not vote. But if you really understand the political system, you kind of are voting for Hillary, because the left doesn't do that, right? And that's really what we're getting into, right? We're getting into this idea that the left is trying to silence a large voting base on the right. This is all politics. This isn't even morals at all. This question isn't moral. It isn't about morals. And I want to point out the utter blatant hypocrisy of anyone who would ask this question of a Christian. Because think about the situation that Christians are stuck in at this point. On the one hand, we live in a nation that exalts the idea of separation of church and state. And so do I, by the way. I think the separation of church and state is brilliant. I don't want the church running the state, and I don't want the state running the church. And that's what separation of church and state means. It's official. It doesn't mean what a lot of people say it means. I mean what Thomas Jefferson was talking about when he wrote to the Danbury Baptist. That's the concept that he was talking about. Not that church policy or things that may be somewhat biblical can't be codified, but that there should be this clear distinction between the two. I think it's brilliant. I think it's perfect for how the world works. So the left exalts separation of church and state. And yet they claim to the Christian, well, how come you didn't use a church standard when you voted? That doesn't make any sense. I'm not supposed to use a church standard to start with, necessarily, right? I'm dealing in a secular institution. That's the government. And it's that way on purpose. Again, it doesn't mean we can't talk morals. We can't have somebody who is a Christian, obviously. And it doesn't mean I personally wouldn't prefer a Christian in the White House. But I had two choices in the matter. And while we're at it from a personal standpoint, when the Republican primary was going on, for most of that time, I was vehemently against Trump. And you know who I have to blame for me changing over to now I'm super pro-Trump? It's because the media, first of all, it's the media's fault that Trump is even president to start with. When I was against Trump, when he was like second or third out of, 18 that I would have preferred, he was second and third from the bottom in my mind of who I would have wanted to have seen president. The reason that was because, or one of the reasons that was because I noticed the press gave him free coverage. So Trump's running around saying he's paying for his own presidential candidacy. And I'm thinking, okay, well, no, duh. Because the media is just giving you free publicity and they're not doing that for anybody else. And in my mind, the reason why that was a negative to Trump was because I failed to realize how completely biased and stupid the media is. I thought the whole thing was a scam on the voters because as a Republican, I'm thinking that here we are again, this New York elite is running as a Republican. Well, I've seen this before, and then the media is helping him in my mind. So I think this is not true. This guy's not on our side. But then I began to notice something. I began to notice that not only did the Democratic establishment, i.e. the media, hate Trump, seemingly really hate Trump, but also the Republican establishment hated him. And that was my clue. That was my sign. I was like, oh, maybe he's not an insider. Maybe he is a legitimate, maybe I should take him at his word. And guess what? He's been president, and I'm super happy with, has he done everything he said? No, but I don't believe it's because he wouldn't do it if he could. I believe the stuff he hasn't yet accomplished is because the Congress and some Republicans have stood in his way. So how could I be upset with Trump? I'm supposed to be upset with Trump because he made some offhanded comment before he was elected about gold digging women that many of us think but don't even say. It doesn't bother me a bit. It doesn't bother me one bit. What bothers me is that people would throw away the Republicans that came out and said, well, this is it. We got to get a new guy. And there's even Republicans to this day that are saying we should nominate somebody else, but other than a guy who's been super successful. We live in an insane world, an insane world. And the idea that people who vote for an immoral party, I mean, I have to deal with people who are Christians, and I don't doubt their sincerity. I don't doubt their salvation. I doubt their wisdom. I was going to say intelligence, but that's not correct. Very intelligent people can see things very differently from me. I think it has to do with wisdom. I think somehow there's a disconnect. I mean, if you think that we shouldn't, like, if you think that it's not biblical to have a wall, that's a clue you're super duper unwise. And if you're justifying it by the Bible, again, not very wise, because that's unbiblical. First of all, the Bible never says anything against a wall from a moral standpoint. And if you were going to use the Bible to be either pro or negative toward a wall, you'd find out the Bible's pro-wall. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily, the only time from a policy standpoint, I would never justify my support of a wall by the Bible to begin with. How dare anybody say that I shouldn't support a wall based on the Bible when the Bible, if you were going to pull that card, is pro-wall? In Nehemiah, the whole book is about God using Nehemiah, who faithfully goes and rebuilds the wall, because the fact that the wall was broken down was a reproach to Jerusalem. And it simply says how the enemies of the people of Israel were using its unprotected status as a way to hurt the city. That's what's going on now. And I get so tired of people saying, because you're for legal immigration, that somehow you're for the immigrant. How dare you say that? It's so juvenile. It's so juvenile to do stuff like that. Because you want a process, a legal, open, transparent process, that means you're against. How about let's reverse that? Are you for slave labor? Because that's what's going on. Everybody saw, well, many people saw that story where ICE went after the, I think it was a chicken plant in, I forget what city it was, where they busted him because they had a bunch of illegals working there, doing jobs Americans won't do. You know, the thing they didn't really cover was the fact that once all the illegal immigrants who were being paid pittance to work there were out of the picture, they had to employ Americans, and they had this job fair where tons of people lined up. People who were experienced at that job but couldn't get the job. And a lot of them, majority of them from what I understand, were minorities. So let me ask you this, Lefty, do you hate minorities? Do you hate minorities? Do you hate the economy? Do you hate the immigrant? That you would allow these corporations justification for slave labor or slave labor. And I don't think somebody who's for or against a wall, who's for open borders, hates the immigrant. I just think you're not thinking about it right. And how dare you claim that somehow you have some moral high ground? Would you vote for the Democrat Party when they say that they're pro-woman and then taxpayer fund the institution that murders females by the hundreds of thousands to millions? I don't even know what the number is. I hate to even think about the number of little baby females that are murdered. But you give women the choice, don't you? You give women the choice. Do you? Or are you supporting rape? Supporting rape. Because let me tell you, a woman goes in and claims that she's raped. Are they going after the rapist? Are they doing DNA checks on the baby that they've murdered, the product of the rape, to find out who did it, and then they're going after them? No, they're not. It's a justification for abortion is all it is. That's all it's ever been. It supports human trafficking, sex slavery, prostitution, incest. Let me ask you, leftist, who wants to throw a moral question at me about how I could support Trump. How do you support Democrats that support that? How do you do that? So I have no problem whatsoever supporting Trump.